Sydney, welcome.
Hi.
You do realize that there's so many topics in that bio, like we could start our own podcast together.
We could. I know. We could just do like a whole series forever and ever. There's so
Well,
much
you
to
said
talk
you wanted to
about.
start your own, so it's either going to be that or write a book. So which one are you going to do?
Possibly both, honestly. I have a really good friend who's a streamer who wants to start a podcast. It'll mostly be
Mm.
for like adult relationship support and advice, but there is so much in that, We'll unpack that too. So,
I
we'll
mean, if
see what
anyone
happens.
knows how to overcome some brutal relationships, I mean, it's you. If you have your mom and your dad both really bad relationships with them and two
Mhm.
divorces, if anyone's an expert on relationships, the good and the bad, it's you.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. Ironically, I turned 30 in 2 weeks. So I feel like it's been really interesting and exciting and fun and healthy. Like it's healing to talk about all of this because I was definitely the like paint a smile person for most of my life. Everything's fine, it's all fine. When really like it wasn't fine, and it was okay that it wasn't fine, but it was not fine. So it's nice to talk about it now.
Well, let me ask you this, the questions I always ask my guests. So, first question is, what's something that you are struggling with currently? And second question is, what's something you overcome recently?
Ironically, both of those have to do with my parents. What's something I'm struggling with currently? My mom and I have gone no contact for, well, she didn't choose it, but I did, 6 months.
Wow, it's a
And
long
that has
time.
been, yeah, we didn't see each other for Christmas, or I don't think it was Thanksgiving either. And any of the like spring holidays or any of that, we have not had any communication, any contact. And recently she reached out because I do have 3 kids and obviously she wants to be grandma. And she reached out so that she could see them. And I set a boundary and an expectation in the relationship. And I said, look, we don't have to have a relationship. I have accepted that as an adult. But if we're going to, and if you're going to have a relationship with my children, then there are some very deep trauma and just life experiences that we need to unpack. So that's going to require that we see a professional and we go to therapy. So if that's what you want, I am actually open to it. I've given it a lot of consideration, and I talked to my therapist about, choosing. Do I choose to have a relationship with her? And I don't have to choose to have a relationship with her. And I was like, I will choose to try this, but I won't go back to the status quo, because we've kind of done the no conversation for like, and it's never been this long, but 2 or 3 months of no communication or limited communication. Then she'll usually offer to either help with the kids, or she'll offer some type of support with the kids in some
That's
way.
always
And then
her
that's
way to knock on the door again.
the olive
Yeah.
branch is, oh, I want to buy them things that they need, or I want to spend some time with them because you're a single mom, so let me support you and help you. And obviously, not having any support from my first husband, my 2 older kids are all with me, my responsibility with me 24/7. They don't do visitation with their dad. And so it's nice whenever someone's like, hey, someone you trust, someone is, hey, I'm going to take your kids and give you a night to yourself. And so it's that balance between, I really do need some time for myself, but I'm not going to sacrifice what is really healthy. And I also want my kids to have a relationship with their grandmother. I'm very close to my grandparents. We actually lived with them when I was a little kid. And so, yeah, I'm facing this decision I gave her the option of therapy. She said that she was interested and that she wants to do some research and talk to her insurance or whatever. And then to be continued. We will see what happens.
So there
But
was no fighting it. She was really open and willing by the
she
sounds
was
of it.
hesitant.
Okay.
She was like, she felt as though not being allowed to have contact with the kids was an ultimatum and was like
Kind of is.
manipulative. And I said,
Definitely not manipulative. It's called a boundary.
right. I said,
Mhm.
well, my children and their emotional well being is my number one priority aside from my own. And if you make unhealthy decisions in our relationships, I also see how you make very similar unhealthy decisions in the relationships you have with them.
Right.
And although they're children right now and they balance that out with, oh, but she's fun and it's fun when I'm there, one day those expectations and that unhealthy dynamic is going to affect them too. They're going to be adults. They will one day be grown-ups, and it won't be these fun kids anymore. They're going to be adults. And then how are you going to handle whenever they do similar things that I did in just kind of figuring out who you are as a person. And the conditional nature of our relationship is I can see it already. It's going to transfer to them. And I don't want my kids to grow up with this person who they love so much. And then they realize that this relationship is very much dependent on them doing what makes her happy. Her emotional needs are very affected by the other, like other people have to help her to regulate her emotions basically. And I don't
And
like,
her
I will not do
grandchildren
that to my
should
children.
not be those people.
No,
No one should, but definitely not her grandchildren.
exactly. So
How old are your kids?
my oldest will, his birthday is 2 days before mine. So my oldest will be 11.
Cute.
My
Yeah,
daughter,
they're still young. I wasn't sure if they were
Mhm.
like teenagers, but they're still young.
They're still young. They're still young enough. And we actually talk a lot about boundaries. And I've told them, an appropriate level why mom and Nana don't have a relationship right now.
What
But
does that sound like to talking to an 11 and 9-year-old?
so for my daughter, it was, well, what happened? And I said, well, mom tried to set a boundary. And we've talked about sometimes whenever we set a boundary or we tell someone no to something that doesn't really align with what is right for us and what is good for us, it upsets those people. And sometimes
Yeah.
when they get upset, they display what is we call like protest behaviors. And sometimes Nana's protest behaviors really hurt. And she was like, well, what happened? What was it? And I was like, well, she got really upset. And one of the things that she did was she destroyed a painting that I made for her for Mother's Day. And I said, and I told my daughter, I was like, it really, really hurt my feelings. I said,
Because that's a scenario that your 9-year-old daughter will understand. Like someone ripping up something you created, that's so hurtful. It must
and
hurt
so
her
it was
watching her mom feel those feelings.
So exactly, and thank you. It was the safest example I could give her. I wasn't going to tell her, the name calling or the verbal abuse or the like. There's certain stuff that's gone on in that relationship that is obviously stuff that like my kids don't need to know about right now. But that was one of those moments where it was like, imagine if you drew this like beautiful painting or picture or whatever for somebody, and they just destroyed it because they got angry with you, because you tried to set a boundary, because you tried to set a new expectation in the relationship. And so she was just confused and she was upset and she was like, well, that's not very nice. And if I did that to one of my brothers or if I did that to one of my friends, yeah, my friends they would be really hurt and they would be upset with me. And I was like, yeah. And my mom's way of handling hurting people is to ignore it. It's as if it never happened. And so there was never a conversation. There was never an apology. There was nothing. It was as if it never happened. And the reason that we talked after that, because it happened in like July of last year, was because there was a hurricane and I had no electricity and needed somewhere to go with my kids for a few days. So I ended up staying in their camper. And then the next
Mother
thing
Nature
that,
handing some olive branches out.
oh gosh. So then we had to see each other, right? So that was July. The painting happened, and then like August or September, we were just without power. My parents had power, so I went and we just pretended that never happened, and it was so unhealthy. And then
Awkward, toxic.
yeah. And then in what happened in November, kind of what pushed me over the edge, and I was like, I've had enough. This year has just been too much with her, was that my kids went to visit at my mom's, and it was around the time of the presidential election, and my kids had a lot of questions, and there was just a lot of stuff that, news and whatnot, and talking as much as they could appropriately. And I don't really talk much about my politics and my views and things like that, but we had talked about, just where I stood on some things. And so my mom decided that she was going to explain to my children my opinion on women's rights. And she decided to also
Whoa.
explain to my children what an abortion was.
Great, Mom. Great.
To my 9 and 11-year-old.
Oh,
Or
God.
at the time, almost 9 and 10-year-old. And they came home and they were like, yeah, we heard what this is. And what do you think about that? And are you okay with that? Are you okay with people doing that, Mom? And I was just like, I have to call my therapist. I need to go to therapy. I can't do this right now. Like, why would she ever? Like, my immediately thought was like, I'm going to need a lot of help to process what this like just happened. I'm in a state of anger and I'm in a state of shock. And my immediate reaction is to obviously be like, what the heck? Okay. Yeah,
I would have
no.
exploded. I would have been on the phone
Like,
in a second.
yeah, no. Yeah, no more, no more, no more, no more. And that was kind of where it just cut. That was it. I needed
Do you have a
space.
conversation or you just stopped answering her calls?
I text her and explained to her that I was extremely shocked and also very disturbed that that was a topic of conversation with them. I am their mom, and if they asked what that was or if they somehow heard it while at our house, I had the right to have a discussion with them about what that was and my stance on, like, they are little kids. They are not at an age where we need to have a discussion about that yet. And so if anybody was going to explain to them anything about it, it was going to be their parent, not their grandmother, who obviously was angry, and it was like she did it spitefully. And I'm like,
That's what I got too. The spite.
you did something because our political views are different.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to win them onto your side, you made this look as though I am a terrible person to children. That is manipulative and extremely toxic and not okay.
Mm-mm.
And so at that point, I was like, look, no more. And then I almost had to see her for Christmas at my grandparents' house, but I was like, I don't want to see her. And my grandpa was like, oh, it keeps the peace. And I was like, I don't want to see her. I am not ready. It's only been at that time, like a little over a month. I can't do it. And I struggled. I struggled in that moment. I read a really great book called Mothers Who Can't Love. And it sounds harsh. It sounds really harsh, but she's an amazing therapist. I can't even think of her name right now. But it helps you to process mothers who usually it's narcissistic. My mom, she was never diagnosed with actual like narcissism. She has untreated bipolar, and possibly, I think the other thing she was diagnosed with was OCD. So a combination of those two are very difficult.
You think that went on your entire childhood?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so she has a very hard time with all of her relationships. She has a very hard time with her friends. She has a very hard time in her partners. She had like between 10 and 15 boyfriends throughout my childhood. Probably more than even that I don't really remember.
And I'm sure through therapy, you've realized how that has affected you in many ways.
Some of which were physically abusive relationships that she was in, and I witnessed a lot of it. So throughout my childhood, my mom was in 2 physically, like very violent, physically abusive relationships. I was never physically abused, but
Thank
this
God.
started when I was in 3rd grade. She was in an abusive relationship for about a year, maybe a little less, to the point of he would keep a pre-mixed like wall putty bucket in like a closet so that he could fix the holes in the walls, because they would get in fights and there were like holes, and it was just
wow.
Yeah, it was a lot. And then she was in
You're
another
8 years old.
Yeah. And I would see it. Like, I would come out of my room and they would be fighting and he would be hitting her. And one night he pushed her into this like gun chest case thing with like glass, and it like broke and shattered all over her. And I'm a little kid, And then the worst was when I was in 4th grade, she started dating this guy and we moved to Alabama. And he was physically abusive. And I mean, there was times where like he would take a gun out and say he was going to shoot himself. And I would call my grandpa, and he's 6 hours away. My grandpa was like my safe person.
If anything
right?
happened, your grandpa's not going to get there quick enough.
No, there was one night where that happened and he took a gun out, and I think he said he was going to shoot her and shoot himself. And I'm in my closet and I'm like, I literally thought that like he was going to come kill me and kill her and then kill himself. They got back together and broke up and got back together. And my grandpa came to Alabama like once or twice, which, I'm hopeful. I'm like, hopeful, please let this be the time that we go home. And it finally ended. And then my teachers were mean to me there. And like, I felt so out of my element. It was horrible. So we finally come home and they break up and she starts seeing somebody else. And of course that doesn't last. She ends up back with this guy, and then she gets pregnant for my little sister.
I was going to ask if you had any siblings. So at this time you're an only child.
Yeah, I've been an only child. I was an only child. My little sister was born when I was 11. Wow. And yeah. And so I remember having a friend over one night, and my mom was pregnant, like fairly pregnant it was the summer, and my little sister was born in August. So this was like June or July.
So she's very pregnant.
Very pregnant. And they get into a fight, and they had gotten into a few fights while she was pregnant.
Her and
like
her
physical
boyfriend.
Fights. Mm-hmm.
While you were a friend over.
Yes. And this is my little sister's dad. So I remember I would take a bath. My friend was in my room and she's like crying. And she was like, I want to go home. And I was like, what's going on? She was like, your stepdad just got home and he said something really mean to your mom. And so I go into the living room and he is hunched over her, yelling and screaming at her. And I could hear it at this point, right? And he's got like his hand, like he's like grabbing her by the hair and he's like yelling at her and he like slapped her or something. And she's like in a recliner. It was just, I remember vividly these experiences. And this is what I know my mom carries a lot of shame about this stuff. And I know that for her, it's such a terrible, and she'll tell me that I was such a terrible mother. Just tell me how terrible I am. And I'm like,
she's looking for the validation.
right.
That's a weird way of putting it.
I was like, you're not terrible. The reason that you were in those relationships has so much to do with your own past, your own experiences, your own abandonment. Like my biological grandmother walked out when my mom was 2 and just left them basically.
That's sad.
So I'm like, you were abandoned and that's scary and that hurts. And you looked for something to help to fill that need for security and love. And you'd never experienced a healthy type of love before. And so you're trying to figure it out. And I'm not mad at you. But we need to talk about it. We got to talk about it because these things affected me too. And I witnessed it all and I had to save you. Like I have those feelings that I have are valid. Just what you experienced is also valid. And it's okay that those things happened. And so there's a lot of shame and there's a lot to unpack in that entire relationship. And then as I became older, she needed control. So she tried to control me and she just needed to compete with me all the time. And it was just this like,
how old were you when it started turning to like control to competition? Like teenage years?
Yeah. When I started to get attention from guys and things of that nature. And there was also always this sense of you are better than those people or those girls or whatever. And like, you don't dress like that because you are better than that. And so
sounds like a lot of projection.
Yeah. And it was, I understood and accepted that, okay, I want to be a responsible, good kid. And I want to do well. And I was very much an overachiever and a perfectionist, trying to work on that. But I also never really embraced being a woman as I was becoming one. It was
you didn't feel like there was no space to become one?
Nor was it okay to be attractive. So I like covered everything. I like covered and smushed, and I was very much like more of like a tomboy. I never played sports, but I got along with guys better than I did women. It still has been very difficult.
When you have that relationship with your mom, and that's the main female relationship, right? How do you ever trust women?
Yeah. So that's definitely been something that I've worked on. But I know that in order to move like forward, we have to figure out what's going to happen. And if it's letting go of the relationship completely, it's letting go of the relationship completely. And if it's however many sessions or years or whatever it is for she and I to process and go through all of this, then we're going to need to do that. I think I was really angry with her because my dad did leave before I was born. My mom was 17 and my dad was 19. And they just met one summer and she got pregnant. But she had a steady boyfriend right before that in high school, and they had broken up or whatever. And so it was the summer, she met this guy, and it was just like a fling. So whatever. But the guy that she raised me with for off and on throughout my childhood is who I called my dad. I knew he wasn't biologically my dad, but she took him from me. And that's how I felt. Like, I know that she didn't actually take him from me, but
he's not in your life anymore.
No,
because she broke up with him.
She not only did she break up with him, but it was a back and forth throughout my childhood. So like the breakups and get backs together, it was this just like constant tumultuous, like he's in my life, she won't let me see him. She, like it was just always something. And so it kind of broke down whenever I was 12. My mom didn't get any support from my dad until I was 12. I had apparently met him once or twice, my biological dad, whenever I was like 3 or 4. They met up at McDonald's or something, and he got to meet me and see me. And he also did see me as a very small baby, but that was it. And he didn't really support or help or anything. He went on with his life. But when I was 12, my mom could get support and he didn't get any rights to visitation. So that's what she did. And at that time, I still had somewhat of a relationship with Mike is the guy that she kind of raised me with off and on. I mean, who I called my dad. Like I called him daddy when I was a kid. So I was curious and I wanted to meet my biological dad. And at the time they weren't together. Actually, at the time when I met my biological dad, my mom was separating from the guy, my little sister's dad, the guy that had abused her. So I wanted to meet my real dad, you know, my biological dad. And I know that it hurt Mike a lot because, you know, he had been my dad he is the person that I equate like safety and like a dad to. And so that was the first major thing that really like he didn't know how to handle or take. And then the second was that when I was in high school, my mom decided to date his first cousin.
Oh God. Your bio dad's first cousin or Mike's first cousin?
No, Mike's first cousin. Mike's first cousin, who when I was a little
Your mom
kid,
has
I would
a
call
lot of like issues from her past. Hey, just it's very clear through the actions.
Like I called this guy uncle. Like I called him uncle by like
and all of a sudden
Dwayne. And now he came by because my mom had bought a house and he wanted to be helpful and whatever. And it was like next to his aunt's house or something. So he like came by to just say hello. And then before I know it, I'm like, are you kidding me? And I was 13 or 14 at the time. And I was like, no. And I would still see Mike. And then he found this out and he didn't all of a sudden quit talking to me, but it was just so awkward.
You're way too young to be dealing with all of these adult relationship dynamics though. When you reflect back, what patterns did you see as you grew up that you realized like, wow, these are the only examples I had. And this is why my relationships are showing up in that way now. Do you think, can you see any correlation?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the book that I read says that you equate love, you grow up to find a partner and you equate their love to the same type of love that you got from your mother. So the people who say like,
always mother?
Men grow up always mother, or the mother figure. Yes, that's what the psychologist says. So the old adage of, men grew up to marry their mother and women grew up to marry their father is not usually the case.
We always marry our mother.
We always marry our mother.
Explain that to me with your example of what you've said so far.
So when I look at my adult relationships, when I got into them, I was hypervigilant, extremely hypervigilant. And I can kind of explain what that is. Hypervigilance is an extreme awareness of other people's emotional states. And you're almost trying to constantly predict what they need next in order to stay calm.
You're walking on eggshells all day.
Constantly. I would say that up until about 2 years ago, I did that at all times with most people.
In all aspects of your life, not even relationships. Wow.
Yeah. I would
That's
say
such a heightened level of stress all day.
Every day. With anyone who I thought might get angry with me and explode. I was fearful, like bosses. I was deathly afraid of my bosses. I was deathly afraid in relationships. I was deathly afraid in friendships. I was extremely, like the worst was obviously with my mom. My mom would blow up on people like at restaurants, like the Crazy Karen videos. I'm so glad no one ever recorded her, but like she would do those
Painting
things.
A great picture. I'd be
it was
so embarrassed to be around that.
Oh, I would just be like, there was this one time, this guy I was dating, actually it was my second husband. We went to like eat lunch with her somewhere and the lady like took too long or whatever she was angry because they were like busy. And the lady finally comes up and she's coming to take her order. And like, my mom just kind of like explodes on her. And so she was like, we're leaving. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. Thankfully, because this poor woman, like I would not want her. I don't want them
I want to leave.
My food. Yeah, I really want to leave. So my ex-husband like left $30 on the table. He's like, please take it, please, because this is crazy. This is weird. This is crazy.
This is obviously not the first time.
Was okay. Oh no, and it was very common. There are times where like my stepdad and I wouldn't order food because we would be like, yeah, they're probably gonna put something in it, or it's gonna be like, no,
really.
No. Oh yeah. So how did that kind of like manifest into my adult relationships? I ended up with friends who were very much controlling, or they needed way more than they ever gave. I always felt like the outcast in my friendships because they would just be like, oh my gosh, your life is so crazy. And it would be like, yeah, something's wrong with me. It was like a label of who I was.
And they didn't want to be a part of it or start getting involved in it?
It was almost like sometimes I was like, are you friends with me because you find all of this interesting? Is it kind of like a real life soap opera because your life is not like your
You
childhood was
found that
so
they would invite you around and then be asking about like your current life just for the drama and not
right. And
in
I
a
was
way to check in with you.
right.
That's
There was a couple
so
of friends
messed
like
up,
that.
Sydney. What kind of friend is that?
And I thought that was good. I didn't know what to do with it. I don't know. And then I
Right.
dated guys who were extremely emotionally unavailable. And I just accepted a lot of things that aren't normal and okay. And, I thought that I really truly believed in my first marriage that I just had to love him more and eventually he would stop. And what was happening was like all forms of abuse, except for physical. I never was like actually physically abused, but every other form of abuse that you could imagine and just total manipulation. My first husband, it's like an unofficial diagnosis. This is just from someone that I know who has studied psychology and I've explained the behaviors. I watched a few documentaries on Ted Bundy and like his ability to manipulate and
Right.
I
Severe
am
narcissism.
90% sure that my first husband is a sociopath, like
Wow.
full, real
Talk to me
sociopath.
about some of the behaviors that are very clear that it's linked to sociopathic behaviors.
Sexual manipulation, his ability to basically get like his boss would allow him to miss work because he would get arrested. He would get into a lot of legal trouble. He has a few charges, a few like sexually related legal charges. He's incarcerated right now. But the amount of manipulation that he was capable of was just like shocking. Like I could watch him lie to someone
You
and you
knew that it was
begin to believe
happening,
it.
or
Kind
you were
of, but
too far into it?
the gaslighting was so intense and my mom used gaslighting as well, so I would question my own ability to remember. And actually I have, and it was worse before, but like I had issues with memory. I couldn't memorize things as a kid. I failed spelling. I didn't have rote memorization at all as a
And
child.
for anyone who's kind of losing us here, when someone's gaslighting you, they are manipulating what happened so much that you start to rethink the actual facts of what happened. So if
Yeah.
you are all you already know you're someone that deals with like memory loss or maybe don't remember things as well, of course you're going to get roped into gaslighting.
Well, so actually, the effects of gaslighting caused the problems with memory. So, like, my
Ah,
brain
okay.
wasn't working correctly because that's another part of complex PTSD is that like your brain begins to not even try to remember things because you just can't. You become more hyper aware of the emotions in the moment. For instance, we would get into arguments and I couldn't remember what my mom said when she would like yell and scream at me, or like I would completely disassociate. So therefore I couldn't remember what was happening because I wasn't fully present in the moment, which is like really deep.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that have experienced this in some capacity, maybe not as extreme as your cases, but maybe. But you can talk to a lot of girls in everyday dating that deal with gaslighting, maybe
Yes,
or
yes.
maybe from their childhood with their parents.
So what I would say is that, while all of this stuff really is intense and heavy, I've improved. I have improved my memory. I am able to remember things better the longer that I am out of that kind of environment. My hypervigilance has gotten like so much better. And anxiety. I thought that I
How do you
just
make
had anxiety.
hypervigilance better?
So what I thought I had was anxiety. That's what I was told when I was in my early adult years and I was having panic attacks. It was like,
That's
oh,
almost
you
like
have
the
anxiety
blanket
diagnoses.
diagnosis. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, yes. So I was told, oh, well, you have anxiety and you just need to work on your anxiety and it'll be okay. And I did get medication at the time because I was having panic attacks. And so it's like, okay, well, I have anxiety. A lot of people have anxiety. That's okay. I didn't know that I had CPTSD until like last year.
What's
Um,
CPSD? CPCSD?
PTSD is complex PTSD.
What's the difference
So
between normal PTSD?
PTSD is usually whenever you go through a traumatic experience. Complex
Okay.
PTSD is whenever you've gone through multiple traumatic experiences over a period of time.
And it's
Just
just
like it's
all the
a
time
cycle and
constant.
continuum.
Yeah.
It
Wow.
changes your personality and your behaviors. And both are obviously a lot to process and there's a lot that goes into it. But so like post-traumatic stress disorder would happen to someone who like witnesses something really bad happening and they're
Yeah.
just like they
Been in a
relive the
car
memory, right?
accident or
Right, or
saw a
right.
murder. I don't know.
Right. They see something and that memory comes back to them. Complex PTSD is kind of difficult because sometimes people do completely suppress the memory. They can't access exactly what has
How do you
happened.
access them again?
You can't always. Some people, the trauma, for people who've been like sexually abused, sometimes they'll never be able to pull that back up. They just can't. And it's kind of scary because there are times where I have to really reflect to remember everything that happened as much as I can. And I've told my therapist, I'm like, I feel like there are things that I can't remember. And she was like, if you can't remember it, your brain is protecting you from it.
Once I identified which type of behaviors kind of spark or trigger, if you want to use that word, the fawning, the like, just give everybody whatever they want, then I could do something about it. And so one of the conversations, ironically, that my boyfriend and I have had is he already has a really deep voice. And when we are having a disagreement, he doesn't notice it. And he's never ever yelling or like screaming at me, but his voice naturally raises. It just does. It is normal. I've actually noticed in his
But it
family that's
shocks
like,
you right away where you almost go back to that place.
yeah. So
Mm.
I've had to tell him, I've had to be like, look, I know you're not doing this because you're trying to be aggressive and you're not doing this because you're trying to take over the conversation. Because I've seen his whole family is the same way and it's just natural and they're not affected by it the way that I am, obviously. Right. And so I've told him, like, look, I know that this is just a part of your personality, but I'm asking that just be mindful. And I'll try to be mindful when we're having a conversation. Just try to keep your voice at a level that doesn't get, over the top. Cause there comes a point where I'm just gonna start forgetting what you're saying. And then a disagreement is really difficult when you don't even remember what the other person's been saying to you because
Agreed.
you just don't know. And so we kind of have a point in a conversation, a disagreement where I'll be like, hey, I'm beginning to feel what ironically I read a lot about this as well. It's called flooding, right? Whenever you're just overwhelmed with emotion, it's called flooding. I'm like, I'm beginning to feel that. So can we just take a couple minutes? Like, I need to ask if you're upset with me. Are you mad or are you just trying to understand? And he's like, no, I'm just trying to understand. So I'm like, okay, we're good. You're not angry with me. You're not like attacking me. And then we can go back into the disagreement and try to figure it out. But I've had to learn how to do that with everybody that I have relationships with. And so it's explaining like why I feel this overwhelm. And then I am trying to do something about it. I don't just put it all on the other person and it's just your responsibility. And then B, it's setting a realistic expectation for myself and the other person too. It's look, I can expect that you're not going to raise your voice because really we don't need to yell in order to have a
Mhm.
disagreement. Like as adults, we should be able to have a conversation without yelling at each other. So and then regulating it throughout the actual like the hardest part is actually doing it in the moment, being
Because
able
you're
to
still
like ask.
fiery in the in the middle of it, so it's almost like going outside your body, becoming the therapist, coming back into the fight.
Yeah.
That's
So my
tough.
therapist says it's my survival brain and my logical brain. And I've got to pull myself to my logical brain and be like, logical brain, you're feeling anxiety. What do you need to do right now? You're feeling overwhelmed. You're feeling hypervigilant. What do you need to do right now? You need to express it. You need to name it. You need to do something with it. And you need to let the other person know. And what's also really, really scary is anytime that I've been expressive of, hey, I'm struggling with this thing, I've had people manipulate me with it, right? Because now they know. Now they have a blueprint for how to get whatever they want.
Ooh,
And so
I do
that's
not like that.
tough too,
How do you ever trust again? And you can't even
Right.
have a fight with someone without them
Right.
manipulating you because they know how you have this fight. Ugh.
Right. Right. Like they basically have a playbook. And once they know that I have memory loss or memory problems, it's, oh, well, you don't even remember things.
Of
So,
course they're gonna use that.
right. And so it's very, very difficult. And I'm like, no, 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 no. It's gotten much better. I would say it's improved like at least
Mhm.
50%. It was definitely a lot. And it's just been a process. And I've grown a lot through it. And I've accepted a lot of things and I've processed a lot of things. And I do a lot of journaling. But
How old
I
were
feel like
you when you went to therapy for the first time?
I was 27?
So recently, in the last few
26 or
years.
27. Yes.
But everything you just told me in the last half hour, 40 minutes or whatever, that's a lot to unpack. And you're just giving me the absolute surface level. So and this question is not meant to be rude, but what's the first question that a therapist is gonna ask you? Like, where do you begin?
The first person that I saw was a counselor, and it was free sessions because I was a teacher.
Got it.
And she wanted to continue to do sessions even though they weren't free anymore. And she was like, I really wish that I could just take you on for free. I was like,
Yeah.
oh,
She's like, I
okay.
don't know if that is a good thing. I
It
don't know.
was
That's
like, she was so sweet and so wonderful and ironic. Unfortunately, she didn't end up being my therapist long term.
when you go to a
But
new therapist, though, do you feel like you have to restart
yeah,
unpacking
and
all over
thankfully
again?
I've only had to do that once. But yeah.
Okay.
And then any therapist that I've seen with someone else since then. So like my ex-husband and I went to therapy. Ironically, my boyfriend and I go to therapy, not because we have a whole ton of problems, but I'm like, look, I
It'll help.
struggle with all of this and there's a lot to unpack with my own life. So we should probably just go talk to somebody just for maintenance.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Good for you. Good for you because
but
there's such a stigma around that.
oh
Especially
yeah,
when it's
I
like a
don't
newer relationship. People
oh
think
yeah.
going to therapy is like when it's gotten bad. So I love that you're going for
Yep.
maintenance. It's like working out.
And so I always share my notes from one therapist to the next. So like
You're like,
when my
here's my file.
it's a very long file. And when I started with my new therapist, who, oh my gosh, I love her so much. But when I started with her, it was just my life was at this like tipping point of I'm not doing this anymore.
Mhm.
And I'm overwhelmed and I just can't. And when I walked in, I just went all out. And she actually offered to work with me on a sliding scale so that I could go to therapy every week.
What does
Um,
that mean, a sliding scale? Like a financial sliding scale?
yes.
Okay,
She offered to work with me at an extremely discounted price, like a fifth of what she normally charges.
right. Just because she
Um,
knew you needed it weekly and not like a monthly, right?
right. And so there for the first couple of months, I was going to therapy every single week. And
Wow.
then I've been able to kind of like manage going, less. I now am going back to therapy every single week because my mom's stuff is kind of coming up and we need to
Mhm.
address it and start moving forward. But I know that I'm going to need that in order to go into those sessions with her. And I have no idea how often we're going to go or, whatever. But yeah. So when I started therapy for the second time, that is what it felt like was like, oh, great. Now I've got to do this again. So once we got established, I'm like, I am never leaving you. We are doing
Yeah.
this for the long haul. Ironically, a
We are
couple of months
married.
ago, yeah, we are married. We is me and you. We are here. Ironically, a couple of months ago, I kind of came to the realization that like one day, and I know it's not nearly at that point yet, but like one day I will not need therapy anymore. At least not the way that I do right now. It may be like, every 6 weeks or, whatever.
Is that a hopeful realization or do you feel like it's going to be a breakup?
It is
'Cause it's
kind
still an
of
ending.
just It's kind of just acknowledging that I've grown to that point. I don't think I'll be sad when it
Mm.
happens. If I'm sad, then that means that
You'll
there's
feel like
still
it's an
something that
accomplishment?
I'm not ready for. So I think it's an accomplishment. I think that even where I'm at right now is an accomplishment for sure.
Well, let me ask you this. If you've been going to therapy for almost 3 years, then it leads back to
Shoot.
one of my first questions. Throughout therapy, what do you feel like you have mastered so far, overcome?
So what I overcame through therapy was something that I didn't even intend to overcome. And it was that I had my deepest trauma was the abandonment from my dad. And it was actually through therapy and yoga, and I'll kinda explain that in a second.
Because you didn't
But,
know you had any issues with that at first.
no, I thought, like, that's not a bit right? Like, and looking at everything I went through, like, I was born into trauma, right? Like, I was born to a single mother, and my dad had no interest in being a part of my life. And I started to do a lot of reflection, and I do something where I don't even know what the name of the therapy it is called, but you basically relive traumatic events in your life and you like allow yourself to fully feel the feelings and then you process it. And then, but I will forewarn anyone listening to this, please don't do that without having some sort of therapist or counselor or something, because it is a very both I find effective, but also an extremely painful and difficult form of processing your trauma. And so I don't recommend that people just go out and do this. But it kind of explains how I led to understanding that my dad was my deepest trauma. And so I kind of like closed my eyes and I imagined all the different traumas that I've experienced. And what I saw when I like closed my eyes, and I'm very visual, was just kind of like this black space. And it was like, almost like being like really deep underwater, like in the ocean. And it's like I kept trying to swim to the bottom and find the bottom. And what I realized when I got there, when I tried to get there, was that there was just this like gaping hole in me as a person. And then it was him, like him not wanting me when I was born, and the amount of like love and just like absolute acceptance for my own children was like, wow, like how do you just not love me and you don't want me? And he didn't want me. And that was
You
kind of
don't
like
get that.
Right. And it was this like, in my mind, while I was having this, like, closing my eyes and trying to, like, figure out what life event do I need to experience in the process, right? That was what came up was, like, first of all, I don't remember it because I was born into it.
Mm.
But that is what was, like, my absolute at the very bottom of the pit of my trauma was this, like, huge feeling of unlovableness. I don't know if that's even a word, but it was like this, like, total
You don't feel worthy
rejection.
of love. You don't feel worthy of someone wanting you.
Yeah, basically. And so what I needed to do was I needed to make peace with that before I will be able to make peace with all the other stuff fully and move forward with my life. And I never wanted to talk to my dad again. I had no interest in talking to my dad. We had a very unhealthy relationship throughout my teenage years. I did try to have a relationship with him. He had multiple kids with all these different people. I have sisters, half sisters, and a half brother, and this whole jumbled mess. But the worst part of it all was that we stopped talking when I was 14 or 15 because he got in a motorcycle accident and my stepmom just didn't want me around. So she just kind of got rid of me. And then when I turned 19 and my son was born, he wanted a relationship with me because he wanted to know my son. And so he kind of got to witness a lot of my marriage to my first husband and just all of the things that I went through there and encouraged me to get divorced. And after that, I tried to continue to have a relationship with him and my stepmom, and they would help with my kids sometimes. And so I was 24, and I'll be honest with you, I struggled. I never had an addiction, but I definitely had I would say it was comforting to go out and drink with my friends when my kids weren't home. You know,
Well,
I would never neglect my children or do it when they were home.
you're
But
looking
when
for
my kids
escape.
weren't home, right, I didn't want to be home. And so I would go out and I would party with my friends and then I would just go home and sleep and I would find something to do with every one of my days. And I didn't always have to be drinking, but it was a part of the socializing with my friends, right?
Mhm.
And so I would go and hang out with my dad and I would drink at his house and I would just hang out with them. And it wasn't like to the point of, hurting myself or hurting anybody else or anything like that. But there was one night where I had been at their house drinking and my stepmom got home and wasn't okay with it, told me to leave. I left. I went back to my house. My dad, or no, I went to a friend's house actually first. And then he was like, no, you need to come home to your own house because he like followed me there apparently. And so my friend drove my car, brought me home. And then my dad went and brought my friend back to their house and came back. And he came to check on me. And I had been drinking. Like I really should not have been driving that night, which was very irresponsible. Don't ever do that. And so I was like, all right, I need to go sleep. So I go to sleep. He ends up sleeping in my bed and something inappropriate happens. And I wake up and I freak out and I'm like, you need to get out of my house. I can't believe that you did that or tried to do that. And you need to get out of my house and like get out now. And I was like screaming and I'm still like, I'm not drunk at this point, but I'm also still just like very out of it. I was also like in a deep sleep. So at that point, I was like, I want no relationship with you. I don't know what the hell happened. And then he apologized and was like, I thought I was at my house and that whatever. And I was like, what? And he was like, I'm telling you, yeah, like I thought that I was at home and in my bed and whatever. And so I believed him.
Yeah.
And then he invited me to go with him on a business trip to meet one of his business partners because he was like,
Why?
oh, right. And of course, me being extremely naive, I was like, sure. And then one of those nights, apparently, he got like really shit faced and admitted to me that he is and was like sexually attracted to me. Yeah. On
What do
top
you
of
do with
everything
that?
else that
What do
I've
you do with that?
been through.
You're
We were in
24
and
years
out.
old. You have
We,
kids. What do you do with
Mhm.
that?
What was scary was that I was hours away from home in a hotel room alone with him.
Yeah.
And he was like standing by the door. And I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know what he's going to do to me. And I was just shocked. And he's like, get in the car. We're going home. And I was just like, okay, we're going to go home. Okay. I'm going to get in the car. We're going to go home. And I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't even process everything that was happening. And so I came home and we had no relationship at that point. That was it. That was the very end. And that was it. And he offered to give me money. I wanted to go on a trip to New York and he already knew that I wanted to go on this like really big trip for myself. My divorce was finalized and I'd never gone anywhere. I'd never really been able to travel. And he was like, I'm going to pay for it. And so he still contacted me and he was like, look, I'm going to leave you the money at my work. You don't have to see me, but I'm going to leave you the money and I want you to go on this trip.
You think
And it
that's
was
coming
his
from
way of,
guilt
oh, yeah,
and
he's dealt with that.
silencing?
Oh, yeah. Probably that too. Yeah. So I took it. I took it. I was like, yeah, absolutely. You can pay for my trip or at least the flights. Like you said you were
Yeah.
going to do it before this even happened. And it's the least that you can do. I never wanted to talk to him again. And I never thought that that really was like the main thing because there's been so much that happened, especially in my marriages. But it was a big thing. And
You
when I
didn't
finally
realize it was
acknowledged,
just inside you that whole time. I mean, linked with the abandonment of childhood and then all of that happening
yeah,
when you're in your 20s, like those are such the opposite issues
yeah.
that
And so,
it's interesting to me that you feel like that's the one that you've overcome. That's the one that will
so
like fuck me up the most. You know?
well, so what happened
Where you
recently
feel
was
like you just
that
understand what's going on a little bit more and how you feel about it. Do you
I had
forgive
this
them or just are you letting it go?
had this moment that night that I was just doing the exercise and trying to figure out, like, what do I need to do next? What is the next thing that I really need to go through? And I thought it was my mom because I did it during that time that we weren't talking around Christmas this past year. And it just kept coming up like my dad. And yoga is another thing because I started going to hot yoga. I absolutely freaking love hot yoga. It's intense, it's a lot of work. It forces me to be very present. If you can imagine, I'm not always very present. Usually I'm in the past. And with anxiety, sometimes I'm also in the future, but it forces me to be so present the whole time that I'm at yoga. And what I've also found really, I've heard normal. I cry at yoga. I am the least publicly emotional person that you will ever. I do not cry in front of people. I've learned to accept like support and help and love more as I've gotten older. I cry at yoga. Not like full on bawling and people can hear me, but
Like tears,
the end,
quiet tears.
yeah, the end of yoga, at the very end of this intense, like, exercise, you have to do these, like, stretch poses, and they
Yeah,
turn
yeah.
off all the lights, and they like, it's very dim, it's very calm, and it's just this, like, really chill music, and they're telling you to remember the intention that you set for your yoga, practice, and you're doing these, like, poses where you're, like, in a pose for a long time, and some of them are meant to release energy is what the yoga instructor says, and I freaking cry at yoga with a sweaty face. No one can tell. Like you can't, like the really funny TikTok and they're like, no one's gonna know. They're not gonna
Yeah.
know. How would they know? Yeah,
That's
that's
how you
me. That's
feel.
me at yoga. And I'm just like, emotions are coming out and I feel good. And it's, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing it. And no one around me knows, but I'm
So do
like,
you think they're happy tears or it's just almost
they
just like a
are.
release?
It's a release and it's happy
Yeah.
because it's I didn't know how broken I was in those moments that those things would happen to me or that, whatever, but it doesn't have to keep coming with me. And that's another thing that yoga will say, you leave it on your mat, you leave it. Whatever it is that you needed to release, you release it and you leave it. I'm like, yeah, I'm leaving it and I'm moving forward and it's going to be good. And it's this acceptance that those things happen. Like I talk about them. I talk about them with, people like with
You
interviews
talk
like
about
this.
them very openly and you feel very disengaged with it. You're moved away from it. That's the energy I get from you.
Yeah,
You
it's
don't feel like
so
you're in it anymore, even though you are a little bit.
Mhm.
Your energy is very mature about everything. And I
thank
worry
you.
about that. You know?
No,
I'm
no.
like, she's almost a
I
little too okay with this. Is everything okay?
No, it really honestly is, but I think that for most people, they allow it to become their identity. I equate my traumatic events to kind of like patches on a jean jacket, and you can just rip them off. Whereas I think some
Mm.
people equate their trauma to a tattoo. It's on their body forever, and that doesn't need to be the case. You
Wow,
rip it
that's a
off, and
beautiful analogy.
you look at it, and you're like, oh, okay, this was with me, and it was like a label, right? It was like on me, but it doesn't need to
Mhm.
be on me anymore, and it can go, and I'm gonna put it and it's kind of like you put it on the shelf. It doesn't leave you completely, but it doesn't need to
But you can remove it whenever
you
you
remove
want.
it. You let it
It's not there
yeah,
forever.
and the more that you talk about it and the more that you accept that it happened and the more that you understand why people do the things that they did, like why was my dad actually it's a part of being narcissistic to be sexually attracted to a family member. I've researched it. It is a thing. Apparently, it happens. Siblings have had it happen where they meet as adults and they are attracted to each other because
Mm,
they didn't it's close to being able to be with yourself. It's this
right.
very weird like feeding the ego. Is it healthy? No. Was it traumatic for me? Absolutely. Do I have a right to always be surprised and never to think that that's okay? Absolutely. But can I also understand human behavior and can I understand that I can't change that it happened? I can't pretend like it didn't happen. And I'm not going to pretend like it didn't happen to protect him because he's embarrassed. I'm going to talk about it
Yes.
because if anybody else has ever felt it, or if anybody else has ever gone through like real incest where people have actually done something to you, then you don't need to feel embarrassed by it because it wasn't your fault that it happened. And their behaviors are explained by some form of psychology, but that never ever excuses what they did to you ever, 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 ever. But I guess just understanding where the behavior came from to me gave me a sense of like peace. Okay, you know what? He does have an abnormal thing that he has to handle and deal with the rest of his life. But to say that I overcame it, I talked to him recently. We've had a few conversations. We sat down and got lunch the other day and just had a very open, frank, and honest conversation about all of this. And I
And what's
never
his
in a
view and opinions on it?
billion years, his first
A lot of
response was like
embarrassment?
embarrassment and shame, absolutely. But also, he was like, I'm really proud of you for continuing to go through your trauma. And I'm sorry that I was so much a part of it. And
What more can you ask for?
I appreciate the genuine, like, apology. I believe that it is true. He was
Mhm.
like, I am really proud of you for building a business and for making your own path in life. And what was so funny was in that moment when he was like, I'm so proud of you. I was like, I've wanted this my whole life. I've wanted this my entire life. I've wanted you to show up for a school event or when I was making honor roll or when I got awards or when I was, having kids and I needed a parent or whenever, my ex-husband was abusing me or whatever. Like, I just wanted you to show up and be like, I am proud of you. That was all I wanted was for you to be there. And you are now. You're here. You're sitting right in front of me and you're telling me you're proud of me. And it means absolutely nothing because I validate myself now. I don't need you to validate me. And in a good way, in a really great way of just thank you. I appreciate that as another adult, from one adult to the other, that you can say that to me. But
But it has no impact.
it has no
Merit.
it doesn't change my self-worth. My self-worth is already where it needs to be, thankfully, finally. And it just was like kind of like it reaffirmed that I really have done all of this work,
Like,
Yeah. So
anything that you have to show, you gotta thank yourself.
right. And that's okay. And it's and there have been people, there
No,
have
I
been
mean
good
in, like, a
friends and
really proud way for yourself.
Mhm.
I mean, Sydney, the stuff that you've gone through, it equals out to someone with the absolute lowest self-worth. That's the only answer to what you've gone through, and the fact that you
Yeah.
have such high self-worth speaks volumes into the work that you've done, you know? Like,
Yeah.
this is something
Yeah.
that you battle and accomplish every single day. You say you journal every day, so I'm sure that the tiniest thing could come up and trigger some old memories that you're like, "Oh, crap, I gotta work through this again today?"
Oh
That
yeah.
that's
And
not going away. It's gonna be a maintenance thing forever.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely it is. And I would say that there are a few things that happened that I really were somewhat out of my control. Obviously, like being in a healthy partnership now and having someone who is so healthy and aware and patient and calm and stable, that has been extremely wonderful, and I had really no control over that. If I find a person or don't find a person, that is something that I had no control over. And then finding a therapist who was so patient and supportive and kind and never dismisses my anxiety, even when my fears are somewhat irrational. She might say, "Hey, things are getting a little weird and maybe it's some of that old stuff coming back up and let's look through it. Let's go through it." But it's never like, "Why do you feel like that? And why are you being that way?" And I felt like most of my childhood was very dismissive. I went to my mom when I was a kid and told her that I had stomach problems and I thought that like I was like sick, like I medically needed something and it was anxiety. And she was like, "You're fine. You need to go to school."
Mm.
Right. It was just I see as a child that there were times where I very obviously something was wrong and it was just very dismissed. And I can now identify healthy people. And I don't choose relationships out of desperation and fear of being alone or abandoned. I choose relationships where people are respecting me and they respect my boundaries and they're not trying to gaslight me or manipulate me. And it is a constant reflection and making sure that I'm, being aware and being mindful of who I choose to be in relationships with because, I deserve to be in relationships where people respect me and appreciate me. And I will say that what pushed me to do any of this was my kids. I don't know that I loved myself In my first marriage, my first husband was very verbally abusive. And I remember being pregnant for my daughter, and he would drink way too much and he would cheat on me a lot. And I couldn't express to him how upset or hurt I was because I was afraid of him. And so I would go sit in her closet and I would just cry by myself. And I just remember, at that point, I already had her brother, and I was like, I can't live, like, I can't do this to them. This is what I did. This is what
The
I went
cycle is
through.
about
This
to
is what,
continue.
right. And I won't do
Go
this.
over.
I love them so much. I love my kids so much, and I won't do it. I won't. I will fight my way out of this, but I will not do this to them. And so I think that that's where my fight and my determination and my like absolute I will not do it anymore. It came from that. It came from just I looked at them and I knew how innocent they were, and I knew how much it hurt me when I was a kid, and I just refused. And they went through some tough things. Their dad, they experienced some unhealthy stuff when they would go to his house when they were seeing him until he was incarcerated. And so we've talked briefly about it, but they're still so little, and they were so little when it happened. But I just want them to know that I always did the best that I could to protect them. I always did the best that I could to heal myself. I always did the best that I could to not bring that trauma into our relationship and our home. And even when it was hard, like getting divorced for a second time, I felt so embarrassed. But my second husband was much better at hiding what he would do, but it was a lot of the same stuff, not on the same level. And so it was easy for it to be excusable. It's, oh, well, he doesn't drink. So if he's talking to other women on the internet, like he's not physically meeting up with them. So yeah, it hurts, but it's not that bad. Or, his verbal abuse isn't him like cursing at me, but maybe it's telling me that he doesn't find me like physically attractive, which he did. It was always death by a thousand cuts with my second husband.
Yeah.
And I was just like,
Do you
why
find
am
you were
I
making
doing
excuses because you
this?
didn't want to go through a second divorce?
I was financially in a place where we were a lot more secure. We finally had bought a home. I'd never had a home, my
Right.
entire childhood. So I
You're willing
finally
to put
had
up
that.
with things to keep that.
And then we had my son, so I had another child with this person, and I just was like, "Ugh, it's gonna be so hard." And I didn't want my kids to be embarrassed or disappointed or whatever. Then he was becoming like verbally critical and what I would consider almost abusive with like my kids. And I was like, oh no, 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 no,
That's when you're gonna draw the line.
no.
Like, you can handle
So
that, but not kids
not
involved.
my kids.
You saw
Um
yourself in them again, I'm sure.
Yeah, I did. I saw a lot of it, and I saw that they would see this and they would think this is normal. That's what I told my therapist. I was like, they're going to think when they grow up that either it's okay to talk to their partner like this, or they're going to think, well, I should put up with it because my mom put up with it.
Right.
And so I did it again.
Or become the protector of you.
Right, and it didn't and my daughter is definitely that. I would say even my son, my oldest, he's definitely but it's more of an emotional. My daughter's more of the she will let you know. He's more of the, like, nurturing, and I'll come give you a hug. But I don't want them to have to do that. They're not responsible for my emotions, and they're not responsible for my well-being, and they're not responsible for keeping us safe, and so that's where my drive came from and
Right.
continues to really come from is I just want to do better. I don't need them to go out and ranting and raving and saying, "Oh, I had a great mom," but I want them to be able to go into adulthood and say, "You know what? I didn't grow up with 50 tons of trauma that I need to deal with." If I can do that, that's all that matters to me. I don't need to be the very best mother in the world. Like that would be like trying to feed my ego. I just want to be a mother who didn't totally screw up my kids by never being intentional or aware of what I'm doing.
Amen to
Yeah.
that. I mean, that's how
Yeah.
I don't have kids myself, but I think as I do, I think that's the only goal. I just don't wanna screw them up. That's the only
Right.
goal.
I just want them to know
Keep them
that
alive and don't screw them up.
right. Don't really purposely make decisions where you know that it's gonna really negatively affect them. That's all. That's all that I want to do. I would like to do better than that some days on the days that I'm able to show up and like do even more. But if
Yeah.
all I can do is allow them to get into adulthood and be like, you know what? My mom really did her best to always be aware of what I needed emotionally and gave that to me in a healthy way and didn't create this weird dynamic where I had to fix her or be the adult when I wasn't an adult or whatever. Like I just want them to have at the very bare minimum that. And
You've broke the cycle. It seems like you're a fantastic mom and not repeating anything that
thank
you've
you.
gone through, you know?
I'm sure trying. Yeah,
I can see. Well,
I'm trying.
Sydney, let me ask you this to start closing it up. where do you go from here? How does all of this relate to your business and what you do for others right now? And where do you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, about a year ago, I lost my job because we lost funding, and it was a few weeks before the pandemic. So, I was
Mhm.
like, oh
I was
crap,
in
what
the
do I
exact
do?
same boat.
What do I do
I
from
feel
here?
you. Yeah.
And I'd already been starting to create content on Twitch. I was streaming just kind of out of like fun, let's see where it goes. I had a little bit of experience as a content creator, and I was like, okay, what do I really want to do with this? How can I make this more intentional? And I started giving free relationship advice on Twitch, and people started asking for coaching. They asked me, like, hey, can you do private coaching? And I was like, okay. And I did. I like had free clients for at least a couple months. And then I took a course through the International Coaching Federation, and it's like a life coaching accredited life coaching classes, and I got certified as a relationship coach. And then I kind of just from there it's I just want to help people. I just want people to know that even if they've experienced these things, I can condense all my knowledge into 8 weeks, and you can really transform the way that you show up in your relationships. And it's all about changing your relationship habits, being really mindful about why you feel either overwhelm or complete emotional exhaustion. Like, where is that coming from? Because there's a source, and there's probably some type of painful event that's tied to why you're associating that way. And so now I do private coaching, and I also have made content on Instagram, and I just started my YouTube channel back up. I'm super, super excited. I have my first video going live next week, and I'm actually doing like a live. I'm so nervous. I'm doing my first like live stream on YouTube instead of Twitch
And
for
live
the
stream, like where you're coaching someone in the moment?
no, 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 no.
Okay.
It'll be on the day that the first YouTube video goes live, but it's more
Okay.
gonna just kind of be an introduction to the
Well,
channel, to what it is that I do, who I am, to kind of that platform so that they know, oh, okay, like we kind of understand who she is and what is your purpose here. And so I'm gonna live stream on YouTube. I don't know how often it's gonna be. I haven't quite decided on a schedule, but I do want to start, integrating what I've learned from streaming on Twitch into YouTube, because I feel like what I love about YouTube is I can curate all of this information. I can put the videos into like these playlists where everything makes sense and can connect for people. And hopefully that's going to help them. That's what I really want to
I
do.
mean, I'd learned so much from you today. I could sit and listen to your advice all day. Can you be my
Thank you.
therapist?
I can't be your therapist, but I could be a coach.
That's exactly step one. I'm excited to
Thank
follow those
you.
YouTube videos.
It's exciting being who I am and just kind of like looking back and kind of reflecting like all this stuff I shared with you is, man, I grew out of being that person, and in a year of owning a business, I am this person. And in 2 years of
Night and
therapy,
day.
I am this
Yeah.
person, and it's really cool. It's really cool. So, yeah.
I really want you to put out a book, and I think yours would be fantastic.
Have you ever read Tara Westover's Educated?
Duh, it's one of the best.
Yeah, she's the reason that I started sharing my stuff.
Yeah. A
Yeah,
lot
she's
of people resonate with their story, and I think I was
mhm.
shocked by how many people resonate with their story. I have a really close friend that had a similar upbringing that I hang out with all the time, and she's only shared a little bits for now and hasn't really gotten into it, but
Yeah,
I
that's
think
definitely been my inspiration. Like, it's just shocking.
when I grew up, and this I'll start concluding this very soon, but when I grew up as when I was your kid's age, I remember hanging out with kids my age that grew up in some tough upbringings, and me being a friend of theirs and kind of seeing their parents fight or just like seeing some toxic behavior that has stuck with me since then. I will never forget those moments. And not that they like traumatized me in a way, but I just remember going home and just, like, thinking, "Wow, like, I feel really bad for these kids that they're going through that. I understand why you have bad behaviors in school now that I see what's happening under your roof." So, I can only imagine some of the kids that you grew up with, some of your friends, I'm sure they were affected, not in a negative way, but just probably always thinking about you, you know?
Yeah, I actually messaged one of my best friends from elementary school, her mom, and told her thank you because she would see my stepdad or my little sister's dad's name in the paper, and she would invite me to go spend the night all the time, like purposely, just to give me a place that felt normal and safe
They
and like,
knew. What else can they
yeah,
do for you, right? Without getting totally involved, you know?
right. And so I told her, I was like, thank you. Thank you. And I told my godmother that the other day as well. I was like, thank you for being like a normal family that I could see and know that that wasn't okay and it wasn't good. And those are the people that when I think of being a mother or I think of being a parent, I think of Mike and I think of them.
Mm.
That's what a mother feels like and that's what a mother does. And that's what it should have been like. And
Yeah.
so I appreciate them. And I've told them that so much. I'm like, thank you for taking me in and for not totally pushing me away, even though what I was going through was so different from your family. Because I
Mhm.
think that some parents can do that. They can be like, I don't want my child associated with that person or
Agreed.
yeah.
My
So I
parents
appreciate
never
that
did that.
too.
I don't even know if they knew kind of some of the stuff that I've seen and experienced, but now they let me
Yeah.
hang out with whoever I want. I think it gave me some character and just let me understand the
Yeah.
world a little bit better.
I
I definitely
agree.
wasn't hanging out with kids, like uppity kids, that's for sure. Thank God. I wouldn't be who I was today, you know?
Right. Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I think,
Absolutely.
like you said, I like your analogy on the patches. You learn a lot from those scars and patches, and you choose whether or not you want to keep them there. You don't have to
Yeah.
identify by them. And
After you've done a lot of work,
yes,
because I think that sometimes people are like, well, you just need to choose to be happy. And I'm like, that's
kill me,
dismissive.
literally kill me. Oh my God. That
Mm,
that could be another episode, Sydney.
yeah,
Especially because you're in
absolutely.
the coaching world. I'm sure you see that all the time.
Yes, toxic
Oh,
positivity, it's horrible.
kill
It's
me. I know. I talk about that
so
all the
cringy.
time.
Mhm.
I get way more value from a little bit of complaining than I do from toxic positivity,
Huh. Oh,
you know?
yeah, all emotions are valid.
I know. Sydney, I've loved this conversation. We've had a
Thank
few
you.
technical issues throughout, and but I just
Okay,
feel like the universe knows we're recording some great stuff, and it's
that's
almost like
right.
trying to prevent us a little bit. But it's
Okay.
been a pleasure, and I truly can't wait until whatever channels and books and documentaries you put out, something. I mean, you've only been doing your business for a year or so. It's gonna
Yeah.
grow exponentially, and I can't wait to watch it.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
And you're welcome back anytime because there's so many more stories to tell.
There's lots. There's so
We've touched the
much.
surface, like the pure surface.
Oh, yeah.
Sydney, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.